Thank you everyone for being here. We're excited to have this conversation tonight with Frank. Feel free to share in the chat where you are dialing in from and what you hope to get out of this evening, if you have any of those thoughts in advance. So this is our first Give Your Impact series. Over the next few months, we're going to be interviewing our advisors, mentors, sources of inspiration, such as Frank, and sustainability and social impact. We're in a constant state of learning and being inspired by these leaders that are pushing the envelope around what it means to be a force for good. And so we thought our community and others might want to benefit from this and be inspired by these conversations. So we're trying to make it an open discussion and a space to learn and explore how we can all come together to support one another. So I invite you to put questions in the chat box, and we'll, I have some questions that I'll be asking, but feel free to also to contribute if you have specific things that you want to ask Frank about. So we just wanted to set the stage really briefly. I'm going to give you a brief intro on Blue Dot. We're on a mission to reduce waste in the promotional products industry. We're part of a $26 billion industry that's really known for waste. Yep, you might get excited about those freebies you get at the conference or when you join a company as a new employee, but we're all kind of questioning, does that really matter? And if we can buy better and more thoughtfully and with sustainability in mind. I know I and Kelly, my business partner and co-founder, and we talk to many people who have like our little closets of shame, and in the back of that is all of these, old water bottles and tote bags that we've gotten in the past that we don't want to throw away because that's obviously wasteful, but we also don't really use them. And so we're really trying to understand if we can change this paradigm. And I'm curious if anyone has similar experiences. Feel free to also comment. But so we've talked a lot about the similarity with fast fashion and looking to the fashion industry for inspiration, in fact, on ways that we can share opportunities to create a more sustainable supply chain in our industry. So that brings us to Frank. Frank, we have the absolute pleasure to have Frank Zambrelli with us today. He is a design and branding chief executive, educator, sustainability expert with extensive professional experience spanning fashion and luxury accessories sector. And after more than a decade of working with world-class brands, he began the award-winning studio Design Quadrant and most recently launched the New York City-based sustainability luxury brand, One Atelier. And Frank, if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, please correct me. Perfectly. His extension into academia nearly a decade ago was inspired by a desire to better knit the changing demands of industry to curricula. In his latest venture, he joins his prior colleagues from the Fair Fashion Center in the formation of a sustainable retail practice within Accenture, the multinational professional services company providing services and strategy, digital, technology, and operations through the lens of sustainability and a more responsible future. And that's just like such an amazing background. We're so thrilled to have you here tonight with us. So thank you. And we know it's a really busy time of year, so we're incredibly grateful that you made this space to talk with us. And one of the things that we've been really interested to learn about is all of your roles in the Sustainability Fashion Coalition and your background. So do you mind just sharing a little bit more about that and the goals around the Sustainable Fashion Coalition and what that work is doing?
Absolutely, my pleasure. It's great to be here tonight and with like-minded thinkers about how we can maybe do things better, a bit more responsibly. So I come out of a long history in the fashion space, sort of came up through the usual ranks of luxury, so Chanel and all of those brands where we made lovely things without really thinking very much about our impact. And then 8 years ago, with a colleague where we were together when we heard about the sort of awful incidents at Rana Plaza in Bangladesh and the death of thousands of workers. At the time, we were connected and doing some work with a university in Scotland. The chairman of that university was Muhammad Yunus, the Nobel laureate, who had really started the Grameen Bank and invested in microfinancing for women, and is just a peaceful soul, bent on doing things better in the world and using his force for good. And he said, "Oh, you fashion people, how is it that we could change fashion, envision fashion as a force for good in the world?" And it was the simplest of questions and the most giant conundrum I have ever been faced with in my life, because I probably don't have to tell you, Rachele or Kelly, fashion's got a lot of bad numbers.
Yeah.
Responsible for so many of the polluting and societal impact damage that happens in the world. And out of that simple question, to make a long story short, we connected to all of the CEOs that we had gotten to know in our 20 plus years in the industry, and convinced them that we weren't just straight out of Coachella hugging trees looking to, move them all to Berkeley and have a love-in, that we really thought we could have an opportunity to make sustainability and profitability come together. That there were leverage points of collective impact that the industry could really accelerate if they worked together, and that we were going to be the knitters, basically, the conveners. And slowly, a few people said yes, and then we had our first meeting, and it was 16 of us. And then 7 years later, we're 47 CEOs representing 270 brands. They're doing about $400 billion in business, about 15% of the total global volume. But because of who they are and their names, their collective impact and resonance is even much greater than that. And so that is really the Fair Fashion Center sort of evolved and grew over time, and is now part of the Responsible Business Coalition, which is extending the fashion coalition to finance, ultimately food, media, and other basically other sectors, other verticals, so that we can extend this convening model to leadership throughout many industries.
That's amazing. I'm curious if you can elaborate on the response to that question around if fashion can be a force for good. So you have this amazing coalition of people that CEOs that dominate the industry. So what are some tactical things that you're doing, and how is it changing?
It started small. It started imagining how we could make, listen, we're from the fashion industry, we're, marketers by trade. How do you make it sexy, right? How do you make something sexy for a CEO? And I'll never, ever forget the first meeting. We were with a very well-known CEO, and she was looking at me like I was wasting her time. But I had brought with me a men's package dress shirt, which most of us will be familiar with. From the plastic to the pins to the clips to the collar bands, you unpack 14 pieces of packaging. Ultimately, that all goes in the garbage. And what we had done very simply is to chart the entire journey of that shirt and its packaging, and was able to share with her that that packaging had come from 5 separate countries, none of which were the country where the shirt was actually manufactured.
Wow.
That packaging collectively was about 16% of the cost of that shirt, and that none of the directors for that packaging had ever worked with each other around what they were doing, because marketing needed one hang tag and the logistics guy needed another thing to ship it correctly, et cetera, et cetera. And after about a simple 2-week project, we saved them 8 cents a shirt, which doesn't sound like much, except she was responsible for 55 million shirts a year. So she saved $4.5 million in a 2-week exercise and a massive, massive carbon footprint. And she suddenly found sustainability very sexy. Go to work and save $4.5 million as a CEO.
Yeah, that's an amazing example. I love it.
And that's
And
super low hanging fruit. You come
yeah.
to over time, dive far more deeply into the organization and recognize that between actual cold hard cash and resiliency and lack of and sort of a
Mhm.
reduction in volatility, but also in the numbers that you can report, that sustainability or this world of ESG is a financially viable world to play in, and really a management approach, and I think the most modern management approach.
Yeah. And are you able to also quantify the um, greenhouse gas emissions saved based off of the reduction of packaging?
Yes, yes, that was equally one of the largest measurements. At the time, we were playing the cold hard cash game just to get them into the room and
Yeah.
understand. It's 7 years ago. They cared a little bit less than. Thankfully, they care a lot more now, but they
Yeah.
cared a little bit less than about their GHG to revenue percentages. Even though it's straight on the Bloomberg terminal, it's the first number you see.
Hmm.
But back then, it wasn't as prevalent. Now it's very prevalent. I'd say most of our CEOs are fluent in GHGs.
Hmm.
But now we're able to do things that we were never able to do, which I think plays right into the business that you're in.
Hmm.
Uh, every cost reduction that we can bring to an organization can have an equal metric of ESG impact.
Yeah.
So, you need to save X millions of dollars off a particular general ledger line of expense. We'll figure out, of course, as a management company, consulting firm, how to save you that money. But at the same time, we'll also figure out what you just saved in carbon or
Hmm.
what you just saved in some sort of social metric.
Yeah.
And now you've got a number to report,
Yeah.
which is more invaluable than just the cash.
Yeah, that's huge. Speaking of, actually, that brings up two questions. I'll go one route and then I'll go the other route. So you mentioned your consulting work, and so you now spend a significant amount of your time with Accenture leading the retail business and sustainability. And I'm curious if you can share an exciting trend or project that you've been seeing happening in this space.
Yeah, for sure. And it's again just further testimony to why this is also so critical. What we look at in this space is again that concentration, that juncture, that nexus of sustainable activity and operating a business profitably
Mm-hmm.
and responsibly. And so, as an example, a company that already was created with a mission to do things better, more responsibly, to be more transparent, but still had a whole lot of problems in the supply chain in terms of meeting that goal. And so you start to unpack a little bit, where are the textiles that they're buying to make the shirt or the skirt or the jacket? Where are they coming from? And is there a more sustainable version? Is there a partnership with a mill that's physically closer
Mm-hmm.
to where the product is actually being cut and sewn? So it's just dissecting the elements through an understanding of, where in the supply chain you can source better materials, maybe with some larger vendors that don't create a cost impact. Another great myth is that operating sustainability is always more expensive.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is. These days, it very often isn't. Sometimes it's cheaper. And
Can you give
so,
an example of what's cheaper that's sustainable? Like a hardcore material that is better, but that's also cheaper?
yes, so right now we're in this magical moment. I think we'll be here for a few years where a larger firm who has economies and naturally lower prices
Mm-hmm.
uh, has lots of elements within their firm that are more sustainable, but they don't move as quickly because it's like the salad at McDonald's. It just doesn't move as quickly, right? So but they've got lots of capacity, and so now you're working with a niche firm, perhaps that's further away from where you're manufacturing, uh, uh, and you're doing it conventionally because that was the mill that you knew of. So in this particular case, a particular material that was made of viscose, which comes from trees and can be made sustainably, but can also be made very unsustainably, very damaging because you're cutting down old growth forests that are not getting replaced. So buying a conventional material that was a little overpriced, able to find them in a country different from where you're manufacturing. With just a little work, we were able to find them a fully sustainable material, or nothing's fully sustainable, but a largely sustainable material made with a viscose that was coming from Lenzig, which is one of the major viscose suppliers that is operating at some of the highest levels of sustainability, $1 cheaper than they were paying per yard for the material, and in the country of manufacture. So you just cut all your transportation costs. You also cut all those GHGs from the transportation. So that bolt that was getting on a plane in China and flying to Vietnam is now getting on a truck and going about 6 miles. So, and it's $1 cheaper. Cut out your GHG. So you just upped your margin on that particular jacket. You're making more money, and now you can report all the GHG savings on that particular piece, and you're still employing somebody. Nobody lost a job in the process,
right?
And so everybody wins.
Yeah, that's great. I love that example. You mentioned materials a little bit, and one of the things we've talked about already together offline is this notion around and we face this in our industry around, do we go organic cotton or do we go recycled polyester? Which one's better? Cotton takes up a ton of water, whereas polyester, recycled polyester emits these microplastics when we wash them. So when we're trying to make these decisions, it's, we come to like, how do we choose which material, which source is better? Do you have thoughts on either that specific example or other ones where we're trying to make a trade-off, and there's so much information out there, but it's hard to, unless we're deep into the material science part of it and the environmentalists, we don't have all the information. So how do we make an educated decision around those types of questions?
Yeah, it is a swirling vortex of uncertainties, isn't it? It's challenging sometimes. The thing though that I would say, Rachele, is the very notion that you're balancing is good and better already. Just the idea of contemplating organic cotton, or in some cases recycled cotton that exists, you're already in a better space. And yes, cotton uses a ton of water. But if they're using that water to grow the cotton and it's organic, there's no pesticides in that water. It's going back into the ground, back into the atmosphere, and coming back down as rain, and it's going straight in. And if you're growing it organically, then you're even sequestering some carbon in the process. Now, if you're using all that water to dye the cotton, it can be more of a problem. But if you're dyeing that cotton in a blue sign factory, that's minimizing the chemical use, that's doing a full capture system and returning clean water back through the effluent of that factory, then it doesn't really matter how much water you use. Water is a constant. There's no less water on the earth today than there was a billion years ago. It's just how clean is that water. So if you're using that water in clean ways, that's going to allow it to go back into the watershed, into the aquifer at some point, and filter its way back up to the ground, then go ahead. It's fine. On the rPET side, again, it's recycled polyester. It's certainly better than virgin polyester. What I'm loving in the world is that we're getting to a point where we can make rPET with some microbes built into it that actually let it break down into materials that don't form the microplastic pollution that's choking our ocean right now. That break down into materials that are not unhealthy for these biomes, that don't end up choking off plankton and invading our fish species. So we've got a little bit of work to do there, but even still, rPET in its conventional form, you're still not pumping more fossil fuels out of the ground to make plastic pellets. It's recycled, so it's always better. Both of those elements produce some positive numbers for the company making that shirt, and can report very confidently with measured metrics exactly what it is that they're saving versus a more conventional choice.
Okay, so you're saying we can go with either right now?
Yeah, what's going to be the best material for that particular product? polyester t-shirts don't feel great usually, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But you want a more performance material for a golf shirt, maybe not 100% cotton.
Yeah.
So as long as you're looking in either the recycled space or the organic space, you're doing some very good things that have a positive impact in the world.
Great, thank you. That's
You
very
bet.
helpful. I just want to remind anyone who's on the call to feel free to ask questions in the chat, but I'll just keep going until you do. And if you don't, that's totally fine, because I could talk forever with Frank, although I won't make him do that. I won't do that to him. I am curious, kind of shifting away from like just apparel, because especially in the branded merchandise space, we're working with water bottles and tote bags and apparel and sometimes phone charge, like we have really cool phone chargers. There's a lot of different things that people can have branded, and I'm curious as to like how we can make that jump from the fast fashion to this kind of parallel industry, and why marketers, our buyers, are the marketers, the HR people of the world, sales reps, why should they care outside of the kind of like the more traditional, I guess, apparel industry? Because our clients are maybe tech firms or consulting firms or firms that aren't necessarily in the consumer product space either.
Yeah. So I'd say just a few years ago, they probably didn't have to care, but the world is a very, very different place. What's happened in the last few years in terms of the acceleration of our climate crisis, the reality that we have 2,700 days left before we cross some unfortunate planetary boundaries that we're not coming back from. It's shifted, I think, the two most principal market forces in industry, and that's consumers and investors. On the investor side, maybe less important to your business, but motivating business is their recognition of the financial materiality of operating within the guardrails of environmental, social, and governance good practice, because they've watched for the past 5 years that those companies that have operated at higher performance levels of ESG returned more money to their shareholders. They had 2.8x in operating profit, in general. So that's just cash. So even if you don't care if the world bursts into a ball of flames tomorrow, as a capitalist, ESG is just good for business.
Yeah.
And now through COVID, the second demonstration was volatility and resiliency. Those companies that were high-performing ESG companies the wheels fell off the bus at a much slower rate, and they came back on the bus much more quickly. A 20% differential in volatility through the 10 months of the pandemic. So now, as a CEO, more importantly as an investment community, I'm looking at your company going, yes, I still care about your P&L and your income statement and your balance sheet and your margin and your inventory, but I want to know what you're doing to sequester carbon. I want to know what you're doing to protect your raw materials. I want to see those ESG numbers from you, because that's cash and resiliency. And so that's now you, Mr. or Mrs. CEO, that's now your fiduciary responsibility. So suddenly I have to care. And that's why we're seeing all of these goals coming into a company. Now you've got the consumer who was already starting to buy organic food, starting to read labels, starting to understand the nutritional implications on food, just much more educated, starting to become aware of the impacts of the things that we do, but also being able to share it. Social media is the great connector, horrible and wonderful all at the same time. But the last thing a company wants is trial by social media. And so now you've got a consumer who clearly cares a lot more and who has the ability to see straight through your supply chain. Now you've got a financial community who's saying, you need to do better, or we're taking our money somewhere else. So now I'm the head of HR, just trying to make a simple decision on a water bottle. And guess what? I've got a whole list of science-based targets that my company has committed to, that my CEO has stated out loud and publicly. And I've got a consumer who's not going to be terribly happy if I send them a piece of garbage that clearly came from a wasteful situation. So I have a responsibility now to do it differently. And if I don't care about that responsibility, maybe you'll get away with it, but less and less, you have less and less chance of getting away with that, because your consumers are going to now associate that promotional thing, that gift, the thing that should have been received and respected and thought of as a nice gesture, in a negative way. So you're doing the antithesis of what you intended with that actual purchase. But I would say there's one maybe greater motivation as that HR professional. I can now have a conversation with my chief sustainability officer, with my CFO, who's actually got to report these numbers in the 10K, and say, I'm going to make this choice instead of that choice. And by the way, I'm going to save 6,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent. So I want you to know that this purchase actually just netted us a reduction in our carbon footprint as a company. And that's why I'm making this choice. And now that's a reportable fact. That goes into your carbon calc.
Do you see the HR, for example, head of HR talking to sustainability? Are they all talking to each other yet?
They're starting to. What we're seeing, we do a lot of work around speaking to the head of investor relations and the social media poster who never go to lunch, right? Those are not two people who have a regular conversation. I say it all the time. If you are not best friends, you are doing your company a disservice, because all of this stuff needs to be out there in social media positively, because you're going to get the negative anyway. So let's make sure, from an HR perspective, 70% of employees want to work for a company that is manifesting positivity and responsible change in the world. So how am I going to attract the best talent if I'm not representing the company everywhere I can in positive ways? And so, perfect opportunity. And we're seeing it now. And I'll make this other comparison, Michelle. When nutritional labels came about, and then we evolved one step further in lots of cities with calorie counts. No judgment. If I look at that cheeseburger, that bacon double cheeseburger, and see that it has 2,200 calories and 70 grams of fat and 1,000 milligrams of sodium, I can still eat it. That's my choice. I'm personally not going to, but I still can. But now I know, I have the information, and I can make a decision. And so if now I'm presented with two water bottles, one of which was made conventionally, the other which does something positive for the earth that I can talk about, and I'm going to talk about it. When I gift that water bottle, there's going to be some information that it gave somebody a job, that it took out 17% less carbon in that particular area, that it's made of a recycled polyester and no virgin polyester, that it's maybe a biodegradable or compostable element. Now, not only am I getting the normal promotional lift from, hey, that was a nice thing that this company gave me. Now I get that secondary, more concentric ring of, not only did I get a nice thing from the company, lovely gesture, but this thing actually does good in the world. Me using this thing, promoting it, which is the whole point of the piece, actually shows me doing good. And you just get these concentric rings of positivity that actually do what you intended to do with the promotional item in the first place. And now, as the head of HR, I can just say, those 10,000 water bottles that I just bought promotionally, here's your, quote unquote check for 6,000 less metric tons of carbon that we produced as a company. Put that in the CR report, put that on your Bloomberg terminal, improve your valuation because your disclosure scores went up. I mean, I could literally link you buying a sustainable water bottle impacts company valuation. That's a direct line. The disclosure scores and ratings.
I love that. I also love, I wrote it down, concentric rings of positivity.
It's business chakras, right? That's where we
are. We have a couple of questions that I might just, Kelly, are you able to synthesize these questions? Because I've been listening to Frank so carefully. I'm not sure if you've been able to kind of take a look and paraphrase. She said yes. Do you want to unmute yourself? And okay, I'll just paraphrase. I think the first question is kind of going back to the cost. In terms of, I think that, to your point, yes, there's times when we found that we can find something at the same price as the sustainable item at the same price as the non-sustainable item,
Yeah.
Or potentially even cheaper. But we are still finding that in many cases
Sure.
it is more expensive. And sometimes it might not be because the materials are more expensive. It could be because they're providing living wages in a factory and doing, the socially responsible thing too. It's oftentimes where we're sourcing, they're actually doing both. So it's kind of hard to unpack and say, oh, it's because it's environmental or it's social. Yeah. But sometimes the case kind of can't be made for saving money, which is kind of sad still.
Except it still can be.
Okay. Tell us more.
Because there's a cost to pissing off a consumer, right? There's a cost to not maximizing your disclosure score. These things have costs to them. So you're paying the piper at some point. So you're going to save your 15% on that particular item because you're buying it less responsibly. And now you're going to give that promotional item to a consumer who's going to value it less. So you took value out of the very reason you bought it in the first place. And conversely, now you're adding value because instead of just presenting a water bottle or whatever the item happens, a pen, whatever the item happens to be, now you're sharing the company's values with that pen, because it goes beyond just saying, here's a nice thing because we like you and we appreciate you. Here's a nice thing. We like you and appreciate you so much that we gave you something that represents our values as a company, that we are a responsible business, that we respect you as a responsible consumer. There's more value in that sort of consumer transaction of that particular product. If you add to that again, whatever it is that you saved, either the social component or the environmental component, and you log it and you track it and you use it, I'm going to guarantee that between those two transactions, the positivity on the consumer side and the positivity on the investor side in terms of you being a more responsible company far outweigh that 15% differential in the cost of the product. So you just have to have a longer game. And as a marketer, it's not a difficult conversation to have. They understand the idea of a promotional product is promoting the company.
But you have to somehow show that that 15% is going to be 15% worth of value on the other side.
Yeah.
Which isn't the math calculation that you can clearly show. Yeah,
you can do the math calculation on the carbon side and on some of the sustainability metrics, and I would certainly recommend that you do that. The same way that I can see the calories on every McDonald's burger, and I understand, and make that decision. I could sort of see that in your products. Where you sort of see that demonstration is in every single social media post gone wrong. Of companies, of individuals posting what a terrible brand experience they just had, or how awful they feel when they realized this or that, and I think that's has to be part of the demonstration. And conversely, the positivity that you see, social media is full of references for us as marketers on why things are better or worse, and that instantaneity of social media means you don't get a shot. That's it. You do it wrong, you can't unpost. It's over.
Okay, I'm going to read to you this question because it's long, so I think it's just interesting for you to hear the whole thing and for the listeners as well. So this is from Johnny. Our Claus Talk sells logo apparels online. So 17 items from hats, t-shirts to yoga pants made on demand for 275 nonprofits. We use Next Level for shirts is our #1 seller. Bella Canvas for hoodies and tracks, #2 seller. We love their quality. Can we push Next Level and Bella, both American companies, to produce organic or recycled apparel and for close to the same cost? Is that possible? We want them to do this so much. We still lose money every month, and we just want to be sustainable and offer social responsible apparel.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Yes. The answer is so far, and it only gets easier, not harder. I haven't. There's never been a moment, and this is literally a part of what I do every day at Accenture. There hasn't been a moment where I haven't been able to find a substitutable material. It is harder on the yoga pants side. Spandex is not a lovely thing for the environment. So that is a little bit challenging, but yoga pants can be made of multiple materials. And I just did recently find a new material that was cotton, viscose with a little bit of elastin, a little bit of lycra in it for a stretchy pant. And two of those three materials were made very sustainably. So pure, no, because there's elastic in it, and we're just not at a point where elastic, unfortunately, is earth friendly. But friendlier materials than probably they're using, because I sense that that's probably a pure poly material, and it's probably a pure virgin poly material. And so we're at a point where those basic materials of shirts and yoga pants and hoodies, especially hoodies, because it's so easy to loop knit anything in so many different materials, where those vendors could absolutely find substitute materials at the same price or less. You just have to encourage them and ask them to do it. And if you're maybe you need to band together with some of their other customers, to sort of make some commitments to them. But none of those categories are terribly difficult. There's so much supply in the world, and there's just going to be more every day, because the companies are getting pushed and pushed and pushed to be transparent.
And maybe that's something we're actually talking about. Johnny, we can also talk offline about this too, but we've been talking to people around the surplus issue in the supply chain, around the extra inventory that's sitting in
dead stock.
Sorry?
Dead stocks.
Dead stocks. There you go. Yeah. So we didn't even know that it had that name. And how can we and instead of that going to the landfill or the incinerator, when the big fashion brands who've over ordered decide that they no longer want that because it's no longer cool, or they don't want that SKU anymore, can we use those dead stocks to make, so maybe it wasn't made originally in the best way, but at least it's now being used for something instead of using a brand new piece of material.
Yeah, and many of those materials are actually, I'd say most of them are actually first quality.
Yeah.
They were excess, or the order got canceled, or there's a designer in Brooklyn, his label is Zero Waste Daniel.
Zero Waste Daniel?
Zero Waste Daniel, his name is obviously Daniel, and everything he makes is from dead stock. He only uses dead stock. And so speaking of workout pants, there's a pair of workout pants that I'm just obsessed with from him, and it's all dead stock.
It's all dead stock.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, we'd love to hear more about that and how we can connect maybe Johnny to them or to other people, because I think that's a really interesting avenue if there's not this specific material.
Yeah. And Rachele, there are large suppliers of dead stocks actually. So, hard to meet very large demands for a major corporate if you've got tens of thousands of units.
Yeah.
But for the smaller worlds, for the mid-sized world, there's plenty of textile in the world. You don't need to make any more.
Yeah. We have only a couple more minutes for one last question, and then I want to ask just kind of final wrap-up question. So one more question from the audience was around the film and TV, to get those companies to change. I don't know if you have any comments around behavior change and how you can get that industry or your thoughts on that industry to do things differently.
Film and TV's impact?
Yeah, sustainability on film and TV sets. I don't know. I think they're looking for any advice on making the business case to the VP of productions and kind of just in that industry. And it could be a little bit to what you were talking about before, around savings.
So what I would say, I mean, maybe two things, unrelated to each other, but all both related to film and TV. One is that most of the large production companies are part of public studios, and so any public company has now got an ESG set of goals that they've got to report to, that they've made public. So anytime any division, and this is what I say, ESG is a team sport. Anytime any division can say, I've made this choice and spent my budget differently, that's a reportable metric, and they should be looking to share that information to make those different decisions. On the other side, in terms of the market itself, increasingly we're seeing businesses. There's a studio in New York called Shop Studio. It's a great broadcast studio, independent studio. And most of the New York broadcasters shoot there, especially interview scenes. On any given day, there'll be Katie Couric or Oprah sort of shooting in their studio. And they operate sustainably as a studio. It's one of the things that they've taken on as a mission. So incredibly, in New York City, in television production, you can just make that choice versus the other choice. The same way I'm, buying my workout pants from Zero Waste Daniel instead of, a larger supplier who doesn't care about these issues and is just using conventional materials. That's just a choice. And so it's mostly about education, letting people understand that sometimes it's literally that simple, make a different choice, but always, especially in a large public company, there is a positive impact for you to report. So get educated on the company's public goals and then change your behaviors to actually support the company's goals. That's what we're all supposed to do anyway, right? We're supposed to memorize the vision and mission of our company, understand our goals for the year, and work in our world, in our particular department, to help the company get there. And now what I'm saying is the same way you understood the company's quarterly financials and what your personal goal was as a sales goal or whatever metrics you had, now your company very likely has sustainability goals that are public. And so learn those the same way you understood the quarterly financial goal, and you'll just behave differently.
Thank you. Because we only have 2 minutes left, I just want to ask this one final closer, which is, what is an action that we can all take, either in our jobs or in our personal lives?
That's a good one. I guess the action that we can all take is to really understand, not the environmental science or the social science. That's maybe too much to ask, right? The same way that, but the same way that I made a decision to eat organic because it was healthier for me. I didn't become, a horticulturist. I didn't get a degree in agriculture. I just knew, and I learned a little bit, and I read a little bit. Understand the very dire nature that we are in as a species on our planet. I'm not kidding when I say in 2,700 days, that's 7-ish years, we will cross certain planetary boundaries, and we won't come back from them. It's not that the world's going to instantly end, or that we're going to blow up, or suddenly, all of our lives are going to be underwater. All that will eventually happen. But in 7 short years, we won't be able to do certain things like grow raw materials in certain places. The cost of certain foods will dramatically increase. Swaths of humanity, millions of people, will become refugees from the land they live on because they'll no longer be able to live there. So in a quick reading, maybe Paul Hawken's Drawdown, maybe that's what I would say. Read one book, Drawdown by Paul Hawken.
Okay.
Because what happens is when you know better, you do better. So I don't have to teach you about calculating your greenhouse gas emissions. I don't have to teach you about sustainable or regenerative agriculture. I just have to get you to understand the reality of our situation, and you'll make different choices. You won't put yourself in a bubble and live 100% sustainably and be ridiculous and be that annoying relative at Thanksgiving who ruins everyone's meal. But out of 10 choices you make a day, you'll do 2 better.
Yeah.
And if the whole world did 2 choices better, wow, we would be in an amazing stance.
That's an amazing final thought. Thank you. I'm gonna
Pleasure.
draw down on our Blue Dot Book Club because
Fantastic.
we're gonna start one of those. We already have actually. We're gonna continue it. Um, and thank you so much again for joining us. We really appreciate it and all of your thoughts and wisdom. Yeah,
It's
and
a
I hope
pleasure.
that
Thanks for trying to do better in the world. It's,
thank you for leading the way and being our guide. We really appreciate it and your leadership there. So thank you
thank you.
again. Have a wonderful evening and rest of 2020. And hopefully
Absolutely.
next year will be better for everyone.
A little bit better every year. Thank you,
Yeah.
Rachele. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Here. Bye.
Bye.